Good afternoon and welcome to the Daily Items ongoing interviews, conversations with candidates for the November 6th election. We're pleased to have Senator Bob Casey with us today. He, of course, is running for re-election in the U.S. Senate against Congressman Lou Barletta. Senator, thanks for coming.
Great to be here.
We have lots to talk about, not a whole lot of time, so why don't we just get going.
Sure.
Yesterday it came out that the national debt was worse than it has been since around the end of World War II, and the deficit is up 17% to $779 billion. Do deficits matter anymore?
They have to matter because of what happens over the long term in terms of just our ability as a nation to sustain that much debt. One of the metrics that a lot of folks will look to is the debt to GDP ratio, in essence the percentage, and that number has been, I guess, for a number of years hovering around 75%, but it's going up, and some believe it'll go above 90% over the next few years, and that alone is cause for concern because it does reach a point, I don't know the exact number, but it does reach a point when it's unsustainable. So I think the first point is both parties have to be concerned about it and have to continue to try to work in a bipartisan fashion to get down reduce the debt and reduce the deficit at the same time. I would note just in the last year, or a little more than a year and a half, it's gone way up, as you indicated. The driver of that, in my judgment, has been the tax bill from December of 2017. The major component part of that increase in the debt was the corporate tax reduction, which went from 35%, 35% down to 21%, and that not only drove up debt, but it put in place a permanent tax cut for large multinational corporations. And then a lot of Republicans who voted for that tax bill then turned around a few months later and were advocating and even voting on budgets that would cut Medicare and Medicaid, just by way of example, by almost $2 trillion.
Well, that's a good point. And
over 10 years.
Senator McConnell, I saw a clip on the news this morning talking about the three big entitlements that need to be seriously addressed: Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. I don't know what he means by seriously addressing that. Do you?
I'm afraid I might know what he means based upon the Republican budgeting. No, I mean, it's literally the truth that in the House, and I hope the Senate Republicans would approach this differently, but in the House in June of this year, the House Budget Committee voted on a budget that would cut, and this is an estimate from the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities in their June 24th, I think is the date of the report, but they indicated that they preserve the tax cuts over the 10 years for big companies and wealthy people, and they have cuts of $5 trillion, and $2 trillion of the $5 trillion in cuts are cuts to the Affordable Care Act, but the big ones are $1.5 trillion cut to Medicaid over 10 years, and Medicare, that cut according to Center on Budget and Policy Priorities is $537 billion over the 10 years. And they're proposing 10-year cuts to Medicare and Medicaid right after they voted for a tax bill that blew a hole in the debt. So we've got a lot of work to do, and I'm hoping that maybe after Election Day that Republicans will work with us to try to bring those numbers down.
You mentioned the Affordable Care Act, and one of the big controversies still to this day seems to be pre-existing conditions. And it seems as this lawsuit down in Texas moves forward,
right,
there's certainly at least a concern that they may go away. Now, I know that's really only the people that are using the open market Affordable Care Act health system. It doesn't involve people who get their health care from their employers, I don't believe.
Well, no, my concern is twofold. It's both those who got their health care through either the exchanges or through the expansion of Medicaid, but also all those other folks out there who had health care long before the Affordable Care Act, but have better protections, including protections against being either denied coverage or being charged a higher rate because you have a pre-existing condition.
Would that lawsuit change the HIPAA protections from back in the 90s?
I don't know if it would, but I do know that the protections that were put in place in the Affordable Care Act, protections against being denied coverage or for pre-existing condition, protections that make sure that you can't be charged higher because you're in a particular class of Americans, meaning in some cases women were being charged higher rates over years for a whole variety of reasons, none of which made sense. There's also this debate within the healthcare policy debate about an age tax. Literally, the Republican healthcare repeal bills would impose an age tax, charging higher rates because of your age. So, the main concern I have is with pre-existing conditions is having, or hoping, I should say, and urging the administration to take action to say, we will defend the Affordable Care Act. They've chosen not to do that, and I think by virtue of Republican attorneys general bringing the lawsuit, Republicans and members of Congress going along with it, and the administration actually going into court and advocating or taking the position that the ACA is unconstitutional. You've got, in essence, the official Republican Party position is those protections don't matter. So I think the pre-existing conditions protections are at risk.
Now, your opponent has obviously voted multiple times in the House to try to repeal the Affordable Care Act, and he's also supportive of this lawsuit, as far as I know. Yet you had an advertisement that you took down in the last couple of days. Want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, we had and have an ad that features a mom who had two daughters who had cancer at a very young age, and that family went through all the travails of what any family endures. It's an ad that's focused on this issue of pre-existing conditions. Anyone who has a pre-existing condition today, even if they're rather healthy, could be denied coverage or charged more down the road if the laws change. And what I'm advocating for is that the laws stay the same. But with regard to what Congressman Barletta said the other day, I take him at his word that there was an impact on his family, and if this ad caused pain to his family, that was certainly not my intention. And I want to make sure that people know that when I approve an ad, I stand behind that ad and will take responsibility for any pain or heartache that would cause to his family or to any family. But I hope that we can at least agree that these protections are critical to every family, his family, my family, every family. And you know the numbers. I mean, we've got, by the most recent, I think the most credible estimate, 5.3 million Pennsylvanians with a pre-existing condition. The same estimate says that 643,000 of them are children. So I think we have to maintain those protections.
Okay, Rick?
Something that's obviously in the news right now is very important to talk about, the Saudi situation.
Yeah.
How should we deal with that? And I'm curious, have you ever met the Crown Prince?
Have not met the Crown Prince. I visited Saudi Arabia. I'm certain of one visit a number of years ago, and we may have had one other brief visit, but I haven't met him. And we've had for many years a good relationship with Saudi Arabia. Lately, however, there are, in addition to this horrible murder of a journalist, that alone should cause the president to, or someone in his administration, to commence an investigation to find out what happened, and then to take whatever steps we can take as a nation in a bilateral relationship to hold the Saudis accountable and let them know that we in our country will in no way condone the the abuse of, and especially the murder of a journalist. Number two is I have a real concern. I think people in both parties have a real concern about what the Saudis are doing in Yemen with regard to loss of life there on the ground. There's a conflict there. We certainly don't want the Houthi-Iran side of that conflict to prevail, but the Saudis have a responsibility to minimize the number of civilian casualties. Our government now requires a certification, and we've got to make sure that that certification isn't just kind of a rubber stamp, that they're held to a high standard when it comes to certifying that they're taking every measure possible to reduce civilian casualties. So we have at least two major conflicts or controversies with the Saudis, and we've got to be honest, even with a nation that we've had a strong relationship with, we've got to be very tough-minded, and I hope the president will do that.
Bill? You've been a pretty vocal critic of the president's policies on immigration. I wonder if you could sort of review where we are on that and sort of what your stance long-term is on what we can do with the people who are already here, maybe securing the border in some capacity. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think number one is the challenge we face is a challenge that we have to address, and I think we have an obligation in both parties to try to fix this problem. That starts with the kind of bipartisan border security that I supported way back in 2013, when it was the last major substantial immigration bill was before the Senate. We got 68 votes. It seems like a long time ago, but people in both parties supported that bill. And one of the fundamental features of it was border security. It would have increased the Border Patrol by 20,000 Border Patrol agents, I think bringing it up to about 38,000, but 20,000 would be the increase. It would have provided 24-hour surveillance using all kinds of technology on the border that in some cases only the Department of Defense can use right now. It would have had all kinds of specific ways to, in fact, secure the border, and it would mandate that there would have to be in essence, a 90% success rate of those who are coming across the border in terms of apprehending individuals. So I'm not sure there's ever been legislation stronger on border security. I think there's still support in both parties for that. But importantly, this legislation also dealt with the other issues. It dealt with a path to citizenship for folks who were learning English and paying taxes and holding down a job and other ways to get from an immigration status to citizenship, which is a long road. It also dealt with the guest worker issues, and we have a huge ag economy that relies upon immigrant labor and how they are dealt with in the system. In essence, what it would do would be to put in place rules and systems that would secure the border, but also make sure that we're dealing with the reality of the American economy, and even deal with what a lot of communities depend upon, which is labor that is sometimes even unskilled labor, but doesn't have a system that processes and accounts for those who are in the workforce. So I think it's a problem that can be solved. I was hoping that when the president said a couple months ago that he would sign a DACA bill to keep the promise to the Dreamers if he had some border security money, and then when people in both parties, including a couple of brave Republicans who stood up and said, we'll support that bill, he pulled the rug out from under everybody, did not get the DACA problem solved. I was hoping that could be the launch pad to getting into the broader immigration debate. So I think that there's a template that you could alter or adjust or add to in that 2013 bill that got 68 votes in the Senate, which meant a lot of Republicans voted for it. It never got a vote in the House, and that was tragic.
Senator, the country's just gone through the hearings for the confirmation of Brett Kavanaugh as the Supreme Court Justice. You did not meet with Brett Kavanaugh.
That's correct.
And I guess my first question is, Why would you decide not to? And then secondly, where do we go from here with that?
Well, certainly with regard to hearing, I was certainly open to a hearing. I met with, or open to a meeting, I should say. I met with then Judge Gorsuch before he was confirmed to the court. But the initial point I made was that it's now the reality, and I don't like saying this or reporting this, but I think it accurately reflects where we are, that there are only 25 individuals in the United States of America who can get on the Supreme Court. And that list of only 25 is such a small number because they're the only judges in America approved by both the Federalist Society and the Heritage Foundation. Not approved by the Chamber of Commerce, not approved by some middle-of-the-road or even conservative Republican group. You have to get the approval of Heritage, which is an organization which, for example, called unions cartels, and the Federalist Society, which is a far-right group in Washington that focuses on judicial appointments. I think that there are literally hundreds of qualified, capable, conservative judges in America who could be on the Supreme Court. They wouldn't be my first choice, but at least they would not be, deciding cases on behalf of corporate special interests or some on behalf of some extreme right group. So I'm hoping that if there is another appointment to the court, that the president will open up the list and let, God help us, even some conservative judges apply. That's the way it ought to be. And I think the difference between how the administration approaches appellate court judges, meaning circuit courts and the Supreme Court, is dramatically different than the process for the district court. Because the same week that I was saying that I was not going to be part of an effort to confirm another corporate justice on an already corporate Supreme Court, in my judgment, that same week I was sitting at a witness table in front of the Judiciary Committee with the Judiciary Committee with Senator Toomey advancing and advocating on behalf of a judge that he chose and that I had to agree to or not. And we've proven that a number of Republican judges get confirmed, but these, in my judgment, tend to be mainstream conservatives, not so radical right that only the Federalist Society or the Heritage Foundation would give them the imprimatur. So I hope we can get back to a process which I think played out for a number of presidencies where you have a much broader array of conservative appointments to choose from.
Speaking of processes, the confirmation process was fairly ugly, and to some degree, you could argue on both sides that neither side
It was very contentious,
accorded
yeah.
itself proudly. Let's put it that way. Where do we go from there on that? Is there any door that gets us away from that?
Well, I hope we get back to, and this would be my preference, but I'm not sure I'll prevail on this, is get back to Supreme Court justices having to get 60 votes in the Senate, either 60 votes in the procedural so-called cloture vote or 60 votes in the final vote, which is the actual confirmation vote. And candidly, I think Judge Kavanaugh would have had real trouble getting to 60, and you can tell that by the vote. I don't know if Justice Gorsuch would have, but they're the first two justices appointed in the you only need 51 vote era. And I think when there are plenty of conservative judges out there who could get on the Supreme Court and rack up 60 votes. And I think if you're seeking an appointment to the most powerful court in the world, and I'm not sure many people would argue with me, and the most powerful court in the world is a lifetime appointment. In this case, in this particular seat, potentially the 5-4 majority appointment, that you ought to be able to rack up 60 votes out of 100. That shouldn't be so high a bar. So that's one thing I would hope going forward. Obviously, look, the acrimony that played out in the Judiciary Committee, I want folks to know this. This is my view, having worked in the Senate a while now. That is not the norm. That was, I think, an aberration. You usually don't see that kind of, not just contention, but also kind of personal back and forth. That's not typical of the Senate. we can't just dismiss it and say, don't worry about it. We all have an obligation. Every member of the Senate has an obligation to try your best to, even when you're making a point that you believe in with great fervor and intensity, to make it without personal invective, to make those points without attacking the motives or the integrity of those that you're in opposition to.
What are you hearing from your constituencies about the way Dr. Ford was treated in that hearing?
Well, I think at a minimum, obviously, with regard to Dr. Ford's testimony and Judge Kavanaugh's testimony, people believe or don't believe one or the other sometimes, and sometimes there's very, very little overlap. There might be lots of reasons for that. It just might be where we are as a society or a political culture. It was important that the committee heard from Dr. Ford directly. I thought she was both credible and persuasive, and even Republicans, at least initially, said that, and then later they kind of moved off it and undermined her. Most didn't attack her directly, but they eventually got to an attack later in their answer, and that was unfortunate because that's not the way someone bringing that testimony to the Senate should be treated. But I think the second part of it was probably equally disturbing, which was the incomplete nature of the additional background check investigation that was done. I realize it wasn't a separate investigation; it was an extension of the background check. But I sat sat with the documents that were in essence under seal, and I went through them all. And it's just my judgment that there could have been a number of additional interviews that could have been done to paint a broader picture of what happened. And I think the FBI should have been accorded more time. I think they did the best they could under not just a short time frame, but the constraints placed on them by the administration. I hope that someday, I hope it's not 100 years from now, but I hope someday we're able to see what was the written constraints that were put on the FBI, because I think that that limited how much evidence they could gather in a very short time frame.
Rick?
Senator, why is it so hard to get any kind of common sense gun legislation done in Washington?
Well, pardon me, I'm just taking a drink. Look, it's been an issue that has been the subject of a great divide in the country for a long time. I think it's entirely consistent, and I think the evidence, the record shows us that you can be a strong supporter of the Second Amendment, as I am and a lot of Americans are, and still support common sense gun measures. That's why you had a bipartisan effort to pass a background check bill. At the time in 2013, Senator Toomey, Senator Manchin, and it got a number of Republican votes and I guess virtually every Democratic vote, or at least almost everyone. So I think we should continue to take steps to advance common sense measures like a background check bill, or a limitation on the magazines, the number of bullets you can shoot at one time. And it just seems self-evident that if we've deemed some people to be either terrorists, or we suspect them of being a terrorist, therefore they can't get in an airplane, why in God's name would that same person be given a gun if we think they're a terrorist? That loophole should be closed. There are a number of, I have a specific bill on hate crimes, that if you're convicted of a misdemeanor hate crime that involves the use of force, you can't have a weapon, because usually that misdemeanor domestic violence offense grows into a felony where a gun could be involved. But I think that in terms of the why of your question, some of it has to do with elections. And for most of my lifetime, the side that said no new laws will make a difference, no new laws we won't permit any new laws from being passed, that side has had a lot more money in elections, and they could really out-advertise and outrun candidates who were proposing even the most common sense measures. I do think that's changing. I do think it's changing in elections so that there's more of a balance in terms of the advocates on either side.
We recently had President Trump do away with a executive order that President Obama had put forward to make it more difficult for people with mental health issues to get guns. Yet I think early in his campaign he had indicated that people with mental health issues should not be allowed to get guns. That seems to me to be a giant step backward. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm afraid that when you have a president who goes in that direction, his own party, even those who believe that there should be common sense measures in place, will not contest that and will not try to persuade him otherwise. And that's a problem, because we can't get any of these bills passed without bipartisan support.
Well, Senator, I know you have to get going. I appreciate you spending this time with us.
Thanks
Thank
for
you
the
very
time.
much. And we'll talk again.
Thank you.
All right.